Okay, let me. Yeah, so my name is Eduardo Ribeiro. I'm from the University of Kent. I'm a PhD candidate. I'm just waiting my viva now for my viva. And my thesis is about willingness to pay for environmental attributes, and this is one of my chapters. Basically, the main motivation is the growing demand for organic, but there is a contrast because my data is from the UK that was converting back to conventional, as you see the black bar, the dark gray bar from the UK. And organic, the idea of chicken meat is just because of the growing demand, also growing consumption of meat, as opposed to other type of meat, chicken meat increase as opposed to other type of meat. And that has several implications because of, selective breeding and intensification of production. Chickens are growing size and the intensification. So there are several implications, use of hormones and so on, several implications to human health and environmental impact as well, because there are more than 30 billion chicken alive. So that's the type of animal that the largest number of animals in farmland, in farms, sorry. So of course, there's an implication, and it's understanding willingness to pay is part of information that we feed into for policymaking purposes. And when we're trying to estimate willingness to pay, there are two types of methods: either stated preference (SP) or reviewed preference approach. And the thing is that both approaches, they have their advantages, but they also have their problems. Particularly stated preference, you have more freedom because you can estimate attributes that are not available in the market. Can be about future, in terms of introducing a new attribute you want to find out, you can actually ask respondents and they will state what their willingness to pay. In the case of continuous evaluation. But in this case of these thesis, the stated preference comes from a choice experiment, which is more shielded in terms of hypothetical bias, but also I've tested that. And so basically, the choice experiment will be its group. The respondent will choose the cars that has the best combination of attributes that they're willing to pay, and with they're willing to buy, with the price attached to it, so we can estimate the willingness to pay. And the reviewed preference data that I used was scanner data come from Kantar panel data, where shoppers would scan their purchases and then we would have access to everything that's in the label, all the characteristics of the chicken meat. So we also I use that in the choice set. So the probability of choosing one option based on the set of attributes attached to that choice. So the idea here was to combine reviewed and stated preference to mitigate, first of all, the problems with stated preference, particularly hypothetical bias, because an individual might choose an option but feel they might be driven because they don't pay for it. So it's a hypothetical scenario. And for the reviewed preference, there are issues with multiple linearity, because usually products, they come with a group of attributes. Usually it's quite difficult to just disentangle them. And also heteroscedasticity, which is quite simple to solve, but also issues of endogeneity. So the main objective of this paper was to estimate, get the truest value of willingness to pay for environmental attributes associated with chicken meat. So that was the main thing. and for that use a combined stated and reviewed preference approach. So you used a choice model, but using stacking data from both revealed, or scan data, real shopping data, and stated preference, which are the from the choice experiments. So these are the main objectives there. So the data, as I said initially, sorry for overlapping, it was the choice experiment had a group of attributes associated with organic, such as environmental friendliness, animal welfare, and all the characteristics that's usually available to simulate a real market situation. And also, as part of the experiment, there was some parts where the respondents answered about the attitudes towards organic, the environment, and the lifestyle. So to see that any correlation there between what they say and the lifestyle, and also their choice for organic. Also, as opportunity to try to inform that. So the state preference approach also serves as validity check. These responses to see if there is any compliance bias or any kind of protest bids, or any kind of things that would make the hypothetical bias affect their choice. And also these were used as insights in terms of to understand what are the characteristics of people that actually choose organic. And one thing that's which is not commonly used, means no novelty for this, it was the use of interaction terms between the socioeconomic characteristics and behavioral characteristics and the attributes to relax also this homogeneity assumption that is common for the model, which in this case here, the main model for the stated was a C-logit. And then I've also used for the combined, when to explain later, that I've used the heteroscedastic C-logits to mitigate also issues with scale differences between stated preference and reviewed preference. These were the result of data, so of course had more robust, larger data with more points also as you combine, and also added more attributes that were not available in the market from reviewed preference, which are usually the approach more preferred by economists. So this is a kind of summary of what I said. So just this is in the poster, but I can skip on. So I've already talked about the limitations of both models, but there's a problem with when you stack the two data. The main issue that there are several issues, but like inter-alternative error structures and observed heterogeneity effect, state dependence, but mainly scale difference. I focused more on scale difference in this case here, although the model addresses those issues simultaneously, which is not often done in the literature. So the results here, these are the willingness to pay that were estimated from the coefficients, and the attribute coefficient divided by the price coefficient. So this here you see that organic, it was not significant for the choice for the combined data, and it was kind of interesting. I would like to just discuss that in the paper as well. The main reasons for that, but all the other attributes are significant. And you see here for the reviewed preference that we didn't have a label for chemical environmental friendliness. It's not available in the market, so that's why the contribution of the stated preference is valuable here in this case. And then we could combine, and this is only possible if the model accepts the parameters restriction of parameters between the two models, and the only model that accepted that restriction was the C-logit heteroscedastic C-logit for this study, because that takes into account scale differences. So it means that for joint estimations that ignore the scale differences, it's likely that the estimations are biased. Of course, here organic is significant in this case, and it's very large, but there's a high heterogeneity across individual characteristics. This model includes individuals that are pro-organic or con-organic, and age. And age has a massive impact, high levels of heterogeneity, especially it's not linear. And I used for that, to address for that, used generations rather than age. So the interpretation here would be that you need to take in consideration the marginal effect, or the marginal utility for different types of individuals. So for future studies, there's probably is an interesting area to explore the heterogeneity here within a willingness to pay. These are the overall results. Quality obviously has a high, not obvious, but intuitively has the highest willingness to pay. Organic, if you don't include the interaction terms, it's not, which means when you don't account for the heterogeneity across individuals, organic is not significant in this case, but it's understandable, because when you include the choice experiment, you have attributes that are usually associated with organic, but now individuals had these attributes are available then to pick from. So it doesn't make sense to choose organic when you have the attributes that you choose organic for example, health or animal welfare or environmental impact. So that's the overall conclusion as well. Yes, scale differences are massive. It's very important. So if it's not taken into account, so the head results are likely to be biased. But when I compare the willingness to pay with and without interaction terms, actually they don't change significantly. So that homogeneity is not a major issue. But of course, it's important to have that level of information, because those are very useful in terms of intervention purposes. I think that's all. Sorry about taking a bit longer than.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank
Do you
you.
have any question for Eduardo?
Hi, Eduardo. Thank you very much for. I mean, this is a very topical issue, surely given the inflation rates and the economic problem we're facing. Everybody's trying to see how to cut down on essential, commodities like this to be able to retain utility. So I was just wondering, I'm more interested on the specification. So you combined data from stated preference and data from reviewed preference, and did you control for, because these are the data generating mechanism or the data generating process for these two is quite different. So how did you account for them? Did you just mesh them, mix them, and started using them, or what did you do? I'm not sure it's very clear from what you.
Oh no, yes. I detailed that in the paper, but yes, very good question. It's a very important aspect of that, because they need to be equivalent. Otherwise, even like they wouldn't accept the restriction, the parameter restriction, that will fail all the test. So what I did, so the choice experiment, you had the choice card where you have the respondent would face with two options. What I did was, because I had the whole data from the scanning to the scanning data, I only selected the places where respondents faced a similar situation. So it's basically a choice probability when they visit visited the shop, and they had two options of meat, chicken meat. And then from there, I'll track what they chose, because I knew that there was available in the shop when they visited, and which one they chose. So there was you can have more than one alternative, but because the data was so large, I could choose only options where you had two alternatives. So choice one, choice two, and of course the third option would be not buy, and that third option also was available in the choice experiment. So they were similar in that sense. So the assumption here is that they would face the same kind of utility, kind of maximization, and all the probability would be similar, if that answers the question. But that was for the reviewed preference. I used a different method. Of course, I used the hedonic price method, but it was a separate kind of a study. I use the same data to use the C-Logix model, where you have three options, and they would choose one of those, and that would be similar for the two methods. And that's probably one of the main things why you could stack them together, as you suggest, because they are quite different in essence.
I think it answers my question. It's quite a good paper. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate.
Thank you. So do we have 4 presentations today or 8?
I think I'm going next.
Okay, I'll stop sharing then. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you.
I think we've got 8 presentations total.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So we need to run fast.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're a bit lagging behind.
Okay, yeah. Can you see my slide? Sure, you should be able to see it.
Yes.
All right, just a second. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, good. All right, so I'm talking about welcome. Oh, sorry, my camera looks off. Apologies. All right, good. Yeah, so we're talking about harmful temperatures in consumption expenditure, and I'm using evidence from Nigeria Household Survey to look at this. It's a paper that I worked with along with colleagues from the University of Manchester, University of Benin, University of Reading, and University of Ibadan. Just to kickstart, we generate our interest from the work of Aragon on 2021 that looked at how non-traded product intensities can, inputs can kind of modify or attenuate the effect of extreme weather events on agricultural productivity loss, especially if we have households that operate under incomplete market, as is the case of many households, as it is the case of many households in several sub-Saharan African countries. What we typically see in this kind of countries where droughts are very persistent is that drought-resistant technologies are equally important. And if we omit the cost and the expenditure of these technologies, then what we report as a response to water shocks could be endogenously overstated. And it's not surprising because few years ago, Nelson and co-authors did a very good job by showing that adaptation strategy could actually be a plausible cause for higher food prices, not necessarily the weather shock itself, but the adaptation strategy could raise the prices of food and therefore could have implications for household welfare. Now, when we talk about higher food prices, because we are going to look at that later when I show you the background, is that most households, especially in Africa, are farmers. Because, for example, in Nigeria, more than 70% of the populace agriculture deals with agricultural output. So if they end up being net food buyers, that is, if they buy food, if they spend more in buying than what they produce, then it means that higher food prices could be a threat to them. And given that the consumption of staple food is characterized as given behavior, that means that this is staple food is something that many households, especially poor households, cannot do without, and therefore, if they have to sacrifice some other expenditures to be able to maintain their level of utility, to be able to avoid loss to utility, then they need to do that. So in event of that, weather shock will simply affect aggregate consumption output, but not necessarily reduce loss to utility. And we've seen literature that have looked at some of these things, looking at how extreme weather temperature affects household consumption. Agwewal did a brilliant work for India, and then we had this paper by the FRPRI in Swaziland. Our own contribution in this case will be to simply understand how this abatement strategy affects net food buyers. And we do that by using food expenditure, which we believe gives us a better way of quantifying economic losses to households due to climate change. And to do that, we simply investigate the impact of extreme temperatures on consumption outcomes. So we have different consumption outcomes, from per capita consumption to cereal to tuber so we looked at these different food crops, as well as we look at their impact over seasons as well as over regions. As a background, we are looking at Nigeria. We are looking at Nigeria, using Nigeria as a, why are we looking at Nigeria? Because Nigeria has the quality we need to do this experiment, or to do this analysis. That's a sharp, within Nigeria, you have, this should be the north. This is really not. So you have the south and the north having different amounts of rainfall and different amount of temperature over time. And also in terms of seasons, we have the dry and the rainy season differing in these regions as you go from the south to the north. Also, like I said, agriculture is the main source of income for many rural poor, more than 80%. And it contributes a lot to the national GDP, about 20%. To conduct this analysis, we're using data set from the Nigerian General Household Survey, where we have more than 5,000 households, representing more than 500 enumeration areas, more than 36 states plus the Federal Capital Territory of Nigeria. So there are three waves to this. So we have the wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, and we combined all these waves. So we end up having 6 years, 2002, 2011, 2012, 2013, 15, and 16. That the data set is from the World Bank and the National Bureau of Statistics of Nigeria. So what we looked at here in this data set, we're interested in the amount of food and non-food items. So how much do households spend on food and non-food items? And then we looked at other control variables like access to market, gender of a household head, amount spent on electricity, and other ones. Then for our weather data, we use the NCP, the CPC weather data set, where we have the maximum and the minimum temperature. It's a gridded data set, 0.5 by 0.5. We use the maximum and the month to derive our mean temperature. We also have the total daily precipitation. So typically we divide the year into two. Dry season from November to March, and April to October forms the wet season for Nigeria. In terms of climate change projection data, we use the Australian Community Climate and Health System Simulator, the CMIP6 scenario, the middle of the road, to assume that no adjustment or no adaptation would take place, just at the middle of the road. And then we look at the medium-term impact as well as the long-term impact of hot temperatures on household consumption in Nigeria. This is just a schematic way of showing you where our data points are, just to convince you that our data is quite heterogeneous in terms of it covers the length and breadth of Nigeria. In terms of model specification, we use the fixed effect panel data model, and I won't go into defining all this because of time, but what I just want you to point at is the DDDA is defined as degree days. That is the normal day. It's simply the days that, so we look at temperatures. So it's every day we look at what's the temperature for today. If it is a temperature that is within the normal band, the normal band is a temperature that is between the K low and the K high. So any temperature between the K low and the K high is counted. And then after we take the average of all those temperatures. So that's the normal temperature at which we feel that crops can grow normally. But we also have what we call the harmful degree days or the harmful degree unit. So any temperature above K high is counted as something very harmful. And also we also take the average of that. So we are looking at that will help us to measure non-linearity, looking at what's the impact of normal degree days on food consumption and what's the impact of high harmful degree days on food consumption. The results are as follows. I will just give a general overview of the results. The paper is available. I think it's been published by the society, so you could check up for it. But the general overview, if you look at it, is that the impact of temperature on food consumption is quite higher during dry season than during wet season, generally across crops. That is what we see. So we see that the impact of, it simply tells us the fact that during dry season, that production is also hampered, and because production is hampered, what happens? The few production available, there is increase in prices on those crops, and because like what we talked about earlier on, that the consumption of staple food is characterized by given behavior, then we need to. Then people need to sustain that amount of utility they have. They only simply need to buy more of the product and therefore spend more. And that is what we are seeing in the result analysis. Did a couple of robustness, which for sake of time I will not go through, but we also investigate sources to look at the rural and the urban areas to see how this affects, because we looked at most of the agricultural citizens or residents are resident in the rural areas, and we see that the impact is more on rural areas than urban areas. Probably the urban area, they have more ways of adapting or adjusting to this increase in temperature, but because the rural areas are characterized mostly by agriculture, they have less non-agricultural way of adapting to high temperature, and therefore they suffer more from increases in hot day degrees, whether it's both the normal hot day or the harmful hot day. Of course, the impact of the harmful hot days is normally much more higher than that of the ordinary degree days. Then we went, the last table I'm going to show you is this. This is just the, showing the effect of predicted climate change. So we have the mid-term effect and the long-term effect. And we can see that if you look at panel B, it tells us that the impact will be will be positive over time. The impact will be positive over time, especially in the rural areas. Of course, in the urban areas, we are seeing some negative effect because of a non-agricultural way of adapting, because of urbanization, because of technologies that are quite that is very rife in the urban areas. And my time is up. Let me just summarize. So here we looked at the linkage between variation in extreme temperature and welfare through the consumption channel. And we found that an additional average HDD is associated with, that should be a rise in consumption. A rise in consumption, a fall in consumption during wet season, but an increase in consumption during dry season. So extreme temperature does not significantly affect urban areas like the rural areas. So we looked at that the rural areas in developing countries are more vulnerable to climate shock than the urban area households. And therefore, we see evidence of consumption substitution that prioritizes consumption of important staple crops. This pattern of impact carries different weight. We looked at the seasonality, we looked at the location of the households, and then we see the different types of food commodity. Lastly, what it appears to be is that more poor people appear to be generally net food consumers, and they live in the rural areas, because from the the papers we reviewed at the beginning, that this impact is more, is much more graver for net food buyers, and that is what we see from people that live in the rural areas. And therefore, government should be thinking of, increasing food subsidy or, compensating income for those that live in such areas to be able to avert the effect of such climate change. All right, thank you very much for your time and for listening. I hope I stayed to time. Yes, so any question, please?
So I think we have a question in chat, if you can access that or want to insert that.
Okay, yeah, so the question, yeah, thank you very much. And so there is no irrigation because irrigation here is because irrigation requires technology, big time technology, which is not really available in many African countries. If you look at the literature on African agriculture, irrigation is totally out of the production function, unlike what you find in the US or in some other developed countries. So most of the agricultural products in Africa are mainly rain-fed, and that's the fact. Yeah.
Thank you. So we can move to our third presentation.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think I will be the next one, and I will share my screen with you.
Sure. Do you want me to give a buzz at 10 minutes?
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Xiaolan. I'm a PhD student from Iowa State University, and I'm working on this paper with my advisor, Greg and Wendong. My research topic is enjoyment restrictions in agriculture conservation programs using a survey approach. So as known, agricultural production can contribute to serious nutrient pollutions in surface waterways in the United States. As we can see from these pictures, these pollutions can cause serious eutrophication as well as dead zones. It's estimated that these pollutions from agriculture accounts for more than 90% of the nitrogen and 80% of the phosphorus loading in our waterways. So in order to mitigate such serious pollutions, conservation practices are designed to improve soil health, water quality, as well as wildlife habitat. These conservation practices include cover crops like this one, conservation tillage and no-till, saturated buffer, filter strips, and a series of nutrient applications. To motivate farmers to adopt this conservation practice mentioned above, the USDA as well as local government provide huge financial support through the voluntary conservation programs such as EQIP. It's estimated that the USDA annual expenditure on this conservation program has increased from $6 billion a year to more than $6 billion over the past 20 years. So we were wondering, would this payment be made more effective? When we mention effective, we want to introduce the concept of additionality in the cost share programs. So ideally, this contract should induce practice that will not otherwise be implemented, and we call this as additional. So funding for non-additional practice, not that cost effective. So we want to introduce a design of the enjoyment restriction in the design of the current contracts with the aim of reducing non-additional payments. In particular, we want to examine farmers' behavioral response to potential enjoyment restrictive programs, such as how would this enjoyment restriction affect farmers' preference and what is their potential impact on farmers' willingness to accept, and finally, what is the potential influence on their participation rate. So the data is from a survey administered to farmers in Iowa's Boone and North Raccoon watersheds, and we conducted 2 waves of the survey in March 2019 and December 2019. For each wave of the survey, we sent 2 different samples, and in the second survey was completed before the COVID lockdowns. We sent out to 2,400 farmers, and finally we received about 568 complete survey and generated total response rate about 28%. This survey asked about farm characteristics, farmer demographics, and it includes an important section of choice experiments. Here is an example question in the choice experiment section. The farmer is asked to choose among three options: program A, program B, and an option of neither program. These two programs vary in 5 attributes: the contract length in years, 2 years, or 4 years, and the requirements on the 3 practice: no-till or strip-till, cover crop practice, and split nitrogen application practice, as well as the annual cost share payments. So here is an example of the baseline contract. And another type of the contract is called the enrollment restricted contract. For this type of the contract, in order to enroll in program A, it has some requirements. For example, if the farmer have already used the split nitrogen application, he may not be eligible to register program A. We have this question like if the program is available for fields currently not using these programs, and based on this information prop, is your field eligible for your program, for either program A or B? And then if the field is eligible, which program do you prefer? We built a discrete choice model in our paper where the utility of farmer I from contract J is a function of the observable utility Vij and an element of the unobservable part of the utility. The observable utility Vij is a function of the contract attributes. Length denotes the contract length in years, and payment is the cost share payments. IN is a indicator for no restriction contract, and IR is an indicator for restricted contract, and I cover crop is a indicator for the requirement for cover crop practice, and so on. SQ is an indicator for the status quo option of the contract. The compensating variation is measured by the willingness to accept, which is the minimum amount of the money paid to the farmer that makes him to accept the contract. And we calculate the willingness to accept using this formula where Vij had the estimated utility from the non-payment attributes of the program J, and VISQ hat is the estimated utility from the status quo option, and beta 2 hat is the estimated coefficient on the payment attributes. Here is the mixed logic result. We can see that most coefficient on the conservation practice have negative signs, which means that generally farmers dislike adding this conservation practice on the field. More importantly, we found that the alternative specific constant, which is a dummy for the status quo option, has positive sign for unrestricted contract, but significantly negative sign for restricted contracts, which means that farmers are more likely to register a conservation contract when they know this is an exclusive contract for them. Here I show the graph for the distributions of the willingness to accept. For example, for this graph, it is we assuming a 2-year contract for cover crops, and this blue curve denotes the enrollment restricted contract, we found that compared with the dotted curve, the blue curve significantly shifted left toward and become narrower. And the other two contracts for no-till and split nitrogen application also have the similar patterns. Back to this table, it shows the mean value of the willingness to accept for the three practice. We found that when there is enrollment restrictions, the willingness to accept significantly reduced, and their difference is very significant. Here we show the participation supply curve. We found that given a reasonable payment amount, the red curve, which means that there is enrollment restrictions, compared with the blue curve, the red curve could induce more farmers to enroll in this program, which means that enrollment restricted contract is more attractive to farmers. However, there is a portion of farmers that is ineligible to register these contracts. So for the green curve, we exclude that portion of farmers. Still, we get a similar conclusion, giving a reasonable amount of the payment. We still find that this enrollment restricted contract will still induce more farmers to enroll in this program. So we conclude that this enrollment restriction may discourage participation for a portion of farmers, and that is excluded. However, we find that these exclusive provisions could make conservation programs more attractive to eligible farmers and lead to substantial decrease in willingness to pay and increasing the participation rate. Finally, the overall effectiveness of this restricted contract may be influenced by the size of the excluded group, the target size of the program, and perhaps the potential behavior spillover effects. So that's all of my presentation. And any comments or questions are welcome.
So, great presentation. Thank you, Zalan. So I have a question. So like, what was the restriction again? Can you explain that? Or,
Do you mean this one?
no, the go of a upper slide. So what do you explain the restriction?
Oh, do you mean this one?
Yeah,
The choice
yeah.
experiments? Yes.
Mhm.
The restriction was like, for example, if a farmer has already used the no-till practice but didn't use cover crop and split nitrogen, then he cannot register program B, and he can only choose between program A and an option of neither program. So the idea of the enrollment restriction is that if the farmer have already used a particular practice, he will not be eligible to register in this program. So this program is aimed to encourage new adopters of this conservation practice.
Yeah, we have another question in the chat box. If you would like to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there is a question in the chat box. Do you want me to read it for you?
Yeah. The result
Okay.
is a bit counterintuitive. If farmers already use the practice, why would they ask for more incentive?
Hi, Dr. Borisova.
Yeah, I don't want to use time from the session. I can just reach Shaolan after the presentation. Great job, by the way.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. So I guess next is mine. So if someone can buzz me at 10 minutes, that'd be great. Do you have other question for Zalan? If not, yeah, I can move to mine. And
Okay, I'll stop sharing.
okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Mohammad Azharuddin. I'm a third-year PhD student at the University of Florida in Food and Resource Economics Department. Today we are going to talk about mitigation of hypothetical bias in stated preference method like choice experiment, and we'll discuss this in the context of doing best management practice, agriculture best management practice level. So thanks to Zalan, she kind of discuss about the non-point source pollution, which is our main research area today. So stated preference in hypothetical bias is kind of a long-studied topic in stated preference method, and there are two, ex ante and ex post method. Today we'll mainly talk about ex ante method like tip talk and consequentiality. So why we are talking about this method in our research, that I'll discuss here a bit by discussing the background of our research. So agriculture-based management practices are designed for reducing non-point source pollution that is resulting from agriculture activities, and so like identified as one of the major source of surface water pollution, and also sometimes for the groundwater pollution also. So these practices are sometimes costly, like they include cost in terms of equipment and infrastructure, and that requires more paperwork, and sometimes these these can also cause reduction of planted acres or harvest areas. So we can see that these additional costs can affect farms' profitability, even though there are cost share programs to cover some of the costs. Most of the cases, these are infrastructure cost, and mostly it covers 75% of the total cost. So in this context, as we are trying to figure out the marketing opportunity of the agriculture-based management practices, because this is an environmental stewardship program which can have potential marketing potential, so that consumers are maybe willing to pay for this type of label for preserving water quality. So we are thinking about doing we are thinking about doing a choice experiment. So to do that choice experiment, which is a stated preference method, there will be some bias. So we are introducing cheap talk there, but at the same time, this best management practice level is kind of still has some policy implications, because it's still not implemented. So the consumers' demand will have some policy consequentiality. That's why we introduced this in our that gives us a ground to check the consequentiality scripts potential to reduce the hypothetical bias. So in literature, mostly consequentialities are studied in terms of public good, but here we are doing a choice experiment with the market good that I'll discuss later. So we are mainly talking about policy consequentiality here in the private good context. So the main objective of our study is to compare the two methods to reduce the hypothetical bias. One is the cheap talk and the other one is the consequentiality script. And at the same time, we'll try to elicit the willingness to pay for the BMP labels, which is the new marketing, new environmental label that can be available in the market. So To do that, we have designed 3 BMP levels. The first one is kind of generic, says that certified BMPs, and it's the EPA is like the certification agency for this level, just to make the label real. And we added 2 other labels to see how slogan or so like some tagline affects the preference of the label. Because BMP is not self-explanatory, so we use preserving water quality or promoting sustainable water, this tagline, to explain the BMP labels to the consumer. And I will try to figure out which label is much more preferred, so that we can figure out which what type of label that we should introduce in the market. So to do that, we are using a choice experiment. Besides best management practices, we are also including other available attribute of the strawberries, like organic and food safety levels such as GAP and BHP level, to see that how best management practices level do with the existing market level. And for the origin, we kept 2 labels. One is the state respondent's own state product, which is kind of representative of the local product, and the product of USA, which is also very much available in the market. And for the price data, we use agriculture marketing service data to figure out what price should cover the upper and lower bound of the strawberry 1 pound strawberry in the market. So we based on that, we choose this for price level for our choice experiment. And we use 10 choices in our experiment, total 4 choice, 3 alternatives, and 1 is none of these options. And we did Bayesian effect design to increase the efficiency of our experimental design. So in the experiment, we introduced 2 treatments. One is cheap talk script and another is consequentiality script. In cheap talk script, we reminded the consumer about the bias, but not the direction of the bias. But then we asked them to reveal their preference truthfully and try to make more realistic choice that they would do in their real grocery shopping. And in consequentiality script, we informed the consumer that their response would have some consequences on the stakeholders of the best management practice. So those are producer, traders, and government agencies that can use those results from the consumer survey, and that can potentially affect the price of the strawberries in future. And we also had a control group, which these groups had no script, so that we can compare the effect of these effect of the treatment groups or scripts. So our data came from a nationwide consumer panel survey from Politics in May 2021. The sample selection criteria was straightforward. The respondent has to be 18 years or older, has to be a primary shopper. That is, they do most of the time select more than shop more than 50% of the time and purchase strawberries in last 6 months. And we collected 799 valid response, from where consequentiality script was seen by 277, cheap talk was seen by 259, and the rest were the control group. And in model, we estimated our model in WTP space rather than preference space, because WTP space provide some advantage, like we can avoid extremely large willing to pay distribution, and that those are more behaviorally reasonable method to estimate the willingness to pay, and also ensures the normal distribution and efficiency of the estimation. And we did that with the GMNL model, where price was fixed at 1 and the other non-price attribute was considered as random parameters. And we did 500 Halton draws for our estimation. Now we'll go straight to our results. So as you can see, we first will talk about the BMP levels, which is our main goal. So these three are the blue mark. These are the control groups willingness to pay. So we can see that BMP level 2 has highest willingness to pay. Kind of that means consumer prefers this preserving water quality like tagline. So we can say that this level is much more preferred. So but as you can see, the distribution, these willingness to pay have very small standard deviation. This is quite natural because this is a kind of new label and the consumers are probably seeing this for the first time. So though they don't have that much heterogeneity in their preference. So because of this homogeneousness of the preference, so we see very packed distribution of the willingness to pay. And then when those who saw the consequential discrete, we see that their willingness to pay has decreased for the BMP levels. But those who have seen the cheap talk, their willingness to pay has decreased most. Now I will move to the other levels of the experiment that we used in our experiment. So the gap and GHP level, which is representing the food safety level, we can see that in consequential discrete, willingness to pay has increased a bit, and for the cheap talk, it has decreased a bit. This is also true for organic, and as you can see, organic has the highest standard deviation among all these levels. That means it has the most heterogeneous preference. This level has the most heterogeneous preference in the market. And we also see similar trend for the own state level product. You can see that in cheap talk, the willingness to pay decreased compared to the consequential discrete having the control as base. So now we'll talk about the different significance. So for the BMP levels, you can see that cheap talk reduce the bias compared to the control group more, and consequential discrete also reduce the bias, but the magnitude of the reduction is much more high in the cheap talk. But then if we move to the other levels, you can see that these blue lines that represent the consequentiality versus control, we can see that when consumers see the consequential discrete for the other levels in the experiment, their willingness to pay increased rather than decreased. But in cheap talk, these for this level, the willingness to pay was decreased. So, and all these differences are significant except the organic one. So, what we find from our research is that both cheap talk and consequential discrete was effective to reduce the hypothetical bias for the BMP levels, but the magnitude was much more larger for the cheap talk rather than the consequential discrete. And willingness to pay for the other levels like food safety level and origin level, willingness to pay increased for consequentiality compared to the cheap talk and control group. So finally, we can say that cheap talk seems to be an easy and simple approach to mitigate the bias compared to the consequentiality one. This is kind of our very simple findings from this research. We are thankful for our funding agencies, AERC and NIFA, to fund this project. Thank you very much for your attentiveness. Please let me know if you have questions. I'll be happy to answer those.
You're at 13 minutes, Azar.
Oh, okay. So,
thanks, Azar. If there is any question for Azar. There is one question.
Yeah. Why organic was? Yeah, because organic level. This is also a separative of the literature that organic has much more higher willingness to pay compared in the market, right? At the consumer level for the strawberry product for fruits. I guess, compared to the other levels, is kind of also very so like related to the literature that organic will have higher willingness to pay compared to the other levels that we presented in the choice experiment.
Hi, I was actually referring to the next slide. This is
Oh,
great.
next slide.
Yeah, I think where
Okay.
you are showing how your chip log and consequentiality they compare to. So yeah, it will be the blue column for the organic label. So I see that when you use consequentiality, you have the willingness to pay tend to be higher compared to the control. So I wonder. So this is yeah.
So the main reason is that because the consequentiality was only for the BMP levels. So that's one of the major findings that if we use consequentiality in choice experiment, that is limit because our consequentiality script was limited to the BMP levels. That's why we see that consequentially script reduced the willingness to pay for the BMP levels, but it didn't work for the other levels.
Okay, yeah, I understand now. Yeah, it's great. You have, it seems like that they are a little control. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I'll stop here because I exhausted my time. So I'd like to welcome the next presenter.
Thanks, Azhar. I'll just share my screen. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Orchishwan Mitro. I work in IMI, International Water Management Institute in New Delhi office. So I'll be presenting today a result from a choice experiment that we did on bundled agricultural insurance product in a state called Bihar in India. So just to set the context, crop insurance is an important risk mitigation strategy in India. In regions like South Asia, where the due to climate risk, the incidence of flood and drought are increasing. And there is a central government scheme in India on agricultural insurance, and it is highly subsidized, where the farmers only have to pay a 2% share of the monsoon crop, and 2% as premium for the monsoon crop, and 1.5% as the premium for the winter crop, and the rest is subsidized. But even then, the coverage is only 30% of the cropped area, and only 19% farmers are insured. One of the main reasons is the premium is still high compared to the income of these farmers, which has led to low buying of insurance in the region. So bundled insurance is often touted as a solution for this. And just I'll explain what bundled insurance is and why we think it might be useful in such cases. Is so a pilot was launched in a state called Bihar in India, where this bundled insurance was offered to farmers. And so the bundled insurance has this index-based flood insurance component to it, and also the farmers, and also linked to it, the farmers are given submergence tolerance seeds that they have to plant along with the insurance. So the yield, these seeds can withstand submergence more than the normal variety, but under normal conditions there is a slight yield penalty. And along with that, after the flood has happened, there is a short time period, often before the winter crop starts, and there is option of starting a short duration vegetable crop in the field after the water has receded. So they were also distributed these short duration vegetable seeds as a coping mechanism. So this bundling of insurance along with this stress tolerance seeds is the bundled insurance we are calling, and why we expect it to be useful is that for example, I'll explain through this diagram. So suppose this orange is the is a full coverage insurance premium. So if the crop is submerged for between 7 to 12 days continuously, it's a moderate flood event, crop is destroyed, and not everything is destroyed, half of it suppose is destroyed, and they are paid 600 rupees for that. And after 12 days of submergence, which is severe flood, then the entire crop, if it is a normal seed, is destroyed, and they are paid 950 rupees for that. But if the farmer was growing stress tolerant seeds, then it can withstand up to 12 days of submergence. And so during that time, for a moderate flood event, there is no requirement of payment of premium. And between 12 to 15 days of submergence, the damage is there slightly, but it's still less than a normal seed. So the payment will be lower, and only after 15 days, the full payment has to be made. So moderate flood events, which are very much more frequent, under stress tolerant seeds can be, requires no payment. Only for the rarer events of extreme floods, you have to pay through money. And so basically, this combination is a more cost-effective way to manage the risk. So this will allow a lower premium cost probably, but also given because of the yield penalty and of these non-submergence tolerant seeds, farmers might be unwilling to accept that. So what we did in our research is to look at to use a choice experiment to find out what is the willingness to pay for this kind of bundled insurance. We had 5 attributes. The first one was the seed type, which was either submergence tolerance and non-submergence tolerance. We did not say the names. We just described the yield profile of these seeds under various submergence conditions. Then the insurance part, which has 4 levels. Basically, it says a trigger point after how many days the insurance amount is paid and what amount is paid. So 600 rupees after 7 days of continuous flooding, etc. So whichever is bold is the base category in our regression will be used. And then the third attribute is whether the post-flood seed was provided or not. Then the price level and who was the insurance provider, because that is supposedly also an important factor. And all of these levels were based on actual observations from the literature. So we used a D-efficient design to choose the choice sets. We had 30 choice sets, and each choice set had 2 alternatives of insurance products and neither option. The 30 cards were divided into 3 blocks of 10 choice sets, which were then so each farmer had 10 choice sets, and the choice sets were unlabeled, so there was no mention of seed variety or insurance company. The pilot was done with in 21 villages with 300 farmers in the Bagmati River, which is a very flood-prone region, but we chose for villages in relatively high, medium, and low flood-prone regions. Also, we checked if in a regression there was any protest response. We did not find any. That is, protest response is if someone is choosing all the status quo for all 10 cards. We did not find any. So for our methodology, we checked with conditional logic model where the coefficient is assumed to be same for all individuals. And the other option that we chose is the random parameter logics where the beta coefficients are taken from a distribution, so it allows preference heterogeneity. We run 2 options. One is where we held price as constant. In another, we use the price as log normal distribution. So for the constant price, what you see is that under the conditional logic model and the random parameter logic model, the RPL model has higher log likelihood. So for our analysis, we concentrate on that. If we look at the regression, we find that the alternate specific constant is positive. So this is actually the marginal utility derived from the proposed flood insurance scheme as opposed to no insurance. So this is the base category because our alternative category was no insurance. Interestingly, we find that the coefficient for the flood tolerant paddy seed is insignificant. So there is because of the yield penalty that I mentioned, farmers' preference for this flood tolerant paddy seed is not significant. But it is also not negative. And then for the insurance, what we find is that that for the limit, so here our base category is limited cover, low payout. So we find significant effects only for the full cover, either low payout or high payout. So full cover is basically making the trigger day lower. So in limited cover, the trigger date starts after a longer period of time. In full cover, it starts at an earlier period of time. So there is a high preference to start it at an earlier period of time. And the most significant thing for our purpose is to look at this red box where we are interacting the seed with the insurance attribute. So this is the effect of the bundling, whether the bundling there is any effect of preference from the farmer side. So just here, so this is the other table where we are using the price as long normal. The other results are the same, and what we say is that the seed, when interacted with full cover high payout, is a negative coefficient, while it is interacted with limited covered high payout, it is positive. So limited cover, as I mentioned, is when you are not covering the moderate flood events. So in those cases, there is a preference for the flood tolerant, for the stress tolerant seeds. While if we have full coverage where the payment starts from an earlier date, then the seed has then the combination of the seed actually has a negative effect on farmers' preference. We also calculated by dividing with the price coefficient the willingness to pay estimates. What we find that the farmers are willing to pay around rupees 110 for the bundle insurance product for the regular variety paddy seed, along with the lowest insurance category that we had in our sample. The farmers are less willing to pay additional to reduce their trigger day for insurance payout as compared to the actual payout that is offered. Also, flood tolerant seed, the willingness to pay is insignificant. So this is driven by the yield penalty of flood tolerant seeds under normal conditions. And also we find that there is significant and positive willingness to pay for the post-flood seeds. And also among the providers, the central government is the most trusted in terms of for the farmers. So in conclusion, we find significant willingness to pay for the insurance product, and also bundling stress tolerant seed with full coverage is negative, while for limited coverage bundling, we find that there is additional willingness to pay for the product. Probably more awareness and financial incentive might be required for farmers to adopt stress tolerant seeds. Many of these farmers, when we interacted, they were not aware of the seeds, so they might be overestimating the yield penalty. Although we did not name the seeds, but still they might be thinking about this seed that are used for stress tolerant. And willingness to pay is higher if the provider is government. So again, there is more trust with the government than private companies, which is important in terms of extending such a program. And post-flood seed has a very high willingness to pay. So yeah, so thank you. And any questions?
Thank you, Mitra. Do you have any questions for Mitra?
I'll stop the share.
Okay. So, who is the next presenter? I guess.
I think he is not here.
Okay. So the next presentation was industry compliance cost under the renewable fuel standard. Do we have the presenter here? Otherwise, we can move to the next one. Climate change technology adoption and field crop farm productivity in the United States. Short-term versus long-term. Speaker Ryan Oliver.
Let me share my screen real quick.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that. We'll just stick with this. So I'll try to keep it quick since we don't have a lot of time, but So this is an ERS project, climate change, technology adoption, and field crop farm productivity. So the background on this is, I think we're all pretty familiar with, the fact that climate change is potentially associated with higher average temperatures, more, frequent extreme weather events. There are some papers that suggest that there'll be significant impacts on agricultural production, heat stress, corn yield reduced by drought, et cetera. This is just a sample. But one of the things that we find is that climate change impacts themselves are difficult to quantify. And this is because different crops have different, differential effects, on, temperature and temperature and precipitation, affect them differently. There's nonlinearities in the variables. Temperature and precipitation are both typically considered quadratic. Data resolution issues, and in general, it's just difficult to disentangle climate-specific effects from other yield shifters and shocks. A lot of climate studies rely on crop yield to measure productivity, but yield is a single-factor productivity measure that can also be affected by other input uses. Basically, you can compensate for yield reductions by adding in other things, which is masked by this type of study. There have been a number of recent studies that also link climatic effects to total factor productivity, but they use aggregate data. And unfortunately, this aggregate data is difficult to link to higher resolution weather data. So our project objective then is to identify these climatic effects on farm level productivity, and then attempt to capture the impact of technology adoption and farm practices on this productivity. And given the sort of time constraint, we're going to just talk about the second one here. And also, this is a work in progress, so we are more than welcome feedback. So our productivity analysis considers a multi-input, multi-output production technology, as well as a stochastic input distance function. We're building upon a previous project that measured this climatic affected adjusted farm level productivity using phase 3 of the United States Department of Agriculture's Agriculture and Resource Management Survey, as well as some county level weather data. And we're basically adding to that through that second stage where we're relating those productivity performances to technology adoption farm practices. So our methodology, again, follows it follows Fair, Permont, and Lovell et al. Using that input-oriented stochastic distance function and the multi-input, multi-output technology. So we have a farm technology T that takes an input vector X and outputs output vector Y. And that in the input distance function gives us a minimum possible input level for producing one of those given output vectors Y, and it allows for deviation from the frontier. So basically, and every year you have a group of farmers, and the most, the most productive farmer, the one that can take the lowest amount of input, produces, the highest amount of output, is set at, basically the relative frontier for that year. And everyone else, is less efficient. And so, yeah, that input requirement set, that basically that envelope of most productive farmers, is our production frontier. Now, again, our data comes from that Agricultural Resource Management Survey. Phase 3 consists of farm level finance and production data. Phase 2 is a subsample, and it's field level practices for 1 to 3 specific commodities. So the first survey is total farms, and the second survey is specific commodities grown that year. We pick one, and then the survey is then tailored to specific crops on some of those farms. To reduce heterogeneity, we only focus on what we call commercially oriented field crop farms, which is their gross cash farm income is over $100,000, and at least 50% of that is from field crops. Our county level precipitation and temperature data comes from Oregon State's PRISM climate group, and we also make use of the National Agricultural Statistical Service for genetically engineered seeds. One of the things that we also do is we use that temperature precipitation data to generate an ORI index, which is a aridity variable, which is a better representation of how temperature and precipitation combined are affecting crop growth. We also take that ORI index and we use it, deviations from the norm of that index, as a weather shock variable. So there's two ways that we're examining this, and you can kind of see here on the screen different areas of the U.S. and this is, it's getting, we'll say, wetter / the ORI index is actually improving in some of these areas. Between we take a norm of the first this first 20 years, 1985 2005, and then from 1999 to 2019, but our deviation has become significantly higher in actually a lot of areas throughout the U.S. And so there's just a lot of, it's getting wetter, but it's also, there's a lot more variation. And so we think this is probably an important thing to capture. Our model setup on the screen here, each year we are estimating, so this is our basic model setup, and then we actually normalize by land in equation number 3. And what we are essentially doing is dividing our error into 2 parts. We have one normally distributed error, kind of the typical, epsilon, but now we also have a half normal error, which is, it is distributed half normal, basically, non-negative, and that becomes our inefficiency. Now, if our inefficiency, we test, the hypothesis that, this inefficiency is not equal to 0. And if that inefficiency is not, we find that it is not equal to 0, we then use that, excuse me, the log variance of that inefficiency as, or we use that log variance of that error as our inefficiency measure. And that becomes the left-hand side in our next stage. Actually, that's right here. So using those estimates, we form those relative levels of total factor productivity across farms using those inefficiency scores in each year. And we measure the following equation. Now, in this equation, we've got a set of variables, GE, VRT, and YM. That's our technology adoption variables, genetically engineered seeds, variable rate technology, and yield monitors. And then we've got another set, GC, RT, and RC, which are farm practice adoption, ground cover, tillage, crop rotations. Now we estimate that first equation, and then we also estimated three other forms, one with state fixed effects, one with first difference terms in order to capture growth short-term relationships, and then we do both of them in a fourth regression. So sticking with just the Corn Belt, we find that yield monitors actually have a fairly significant effect, but only for some reason, in the growth term. And we find that variable rate technology has statistically significant effect on absolute levels. Curiously, there is no statistically significant effect for any of our farm practice variables. Now, if we expand the Corn Belt and we start taking a look at all states involved in our sample, another 13 or so, we find that yield monitors are across the board statistically significant, and that other technologies simply just are not statistically significant at all. Now, so this is our first pass at this, but again, since our results suggest that yield monitor adoption is associated with an increase in TFP, while the others are a little bit more narrow, it's possible that what we're seeing is yield monitors are simply more effective, because they allow for several forms of local adoption and adaptation. And from other literature, we believe that we may need to disaggregate forms of variable rate technology. What we've done is we've taken seeding, fertilizer, and pesticides and aggregated them into one category. And actually, from recent literature, we found that the adoption of variable rate pesticide technology is fairly minimal. And so it may be that we've accidentally added some noise in by grouping them all together. So we're going to extract all three of them and run it one more time. And there's very, very limited evidence of farm practice adoption improving efficiency. But we also suspect this might be because our surveys themselves. So the earlier surveys have less detailed information. And so as we pick up more, as our surveys extend into the future, we expect that having additional data may lower some of the standard errors. We may actually end up seeing more effect, just simply because from 2005 to about 2010, 2012, the level of granularity and some of the questions themselves are a little bit vaguer, and we would also expect adoption rates in general to increase. So we believe this might change over time. So that is it. Yeah, and if we welcome any feedback you might have, you can contact me here at is my last name, our first name dot last name at usda.gov. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
I see we've got a question. Be happy to try and answer that.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. I think it's quite innovative to see some of the measures you've put out to capture, weather shocks, and I mean, yeah, it's quite interesting. But I'm just wondering how robust your results are in terms of probably using the conventional weather shock measures, and also using other weather data sets to derive the shock index, rather than, I mean, you use the PRISM, but you could also, there are a wide range of other weather data set. I mean, it just to make your work more and kind of robust in terms of since you are bringing in a new kind of a novel measure. So it's if you want it to be used widely in climate econometrics or in climate change studies, then there should be something to show that it's quite robust to several estimations. So I don't know if you did that.
We have not. That's actually a really good idea. Yeah, even if we just like we take some other weather data and then maybe mess around with the timings, see if it's not too sensitive to being changed, like the norm itself, not too sensitive to being changed up and down a couple of years. That's an excellent idea. So yeah, we will definitely do that. Thank you. Any others? I think we're almost. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. And I think we don't have the other presenters today. Or do we have him? If not, then I think we are done with today's session.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's nice meeting you. I hope to see in person one of these days.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
All right. Yeah. Bye.
For those beautiful presentations. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye, and thank you. Bye.